Today, we're going to see how each state voted relative to the rest of the country in the 1980 presidential election. We'll see which states were redder and bluer. So no spreadsheet in this one, but we're going to put up the background information. We've got 1980, and everybody knows 84 was a landslide, but 80 also was too. Ronald Reagan took down incumbent Jimmy Carter. He got 489 electoral votes out of 44 states. His popular vote share was 50.7. Carter got 49 electoral votes out of 6 states and D.C. That was worth 41% of the vote. There's also a somewhat significant third-party challenger. John Anderson, the independent, got 6.6% nationally, but he didn't carry any states. Some states he got very little support, but close to 10 states he got double digits, so factor that in accordingly. The main thing we're concerned about this time is the popular vote difference between Reagan and Carter. Well, 50.7% minus 41% comes out to a 9.7% advantage for Reagan. So any state that supported Reagan by more than that is relatively redder. Any state that supported Reagan by less than that, or Carter, is relatively bluer. The electoral map we're going to use here is from 1980. We've also got 4 levels of shading here. The darkest colors are more than 10%. The very lightest colors are under 1%. So let's start in the first state. It's Alabama. This was a close one. Reagan won the state with 48.8. Carter got 47.5. The margin for Reagan was just 1.3. That's clearly less than the 9.7% national popular vote. The difference between 9.7 and 1.3 means Alabama was relatively bluer by 8.4%. Now let's quickly go through the rest of these states in alphabetical order. In Alaska, that state supported Reagan by an additional significant 18.3%. Arizona was even more than that at 22.7. Arkansas was bluer by 9.1. California, Reagan's home state, redder by 7.1. Colorado was twice that at 14.3. Connecticut actually had the smallest relative percentage out of every state. It voted perfectly in line with the country at 9.7% for Reagan. If you want to break the tie and go down to the hundredths of a percent, then it was very slightly relatively bluer. Delaware was bluer by 7.4. Florida was the same amount in the opposite direction at 7.3. Georgia was Carter's home state, and it was relatively the bluest out of all of them, coming in at 24.5. Hawaii was behind at 11.6. Idaho was way redder at 31.6. Illinois a little bit bluer at 1.7. Then it was redder in Indiana at 8.6. Iowa 3, and Kansas 14.9. Now we've got a batch of relatively bluer states. It's Kentucky at 8.2, Louisiana 4.3, Maine 6.4. The first district was 6.6, the second was 6 even. Maryland 12.6, Massachusetts 9.6, Michigan 3.2, Minnesota 13.6, Mississippi 8.4, and Missouri 2.9. Then some more GOP-friendly states. It's Montana, 14.7, Nebraska, 29.8, Nevada, 25.9, New Hampshire, 19.6, New Jersey, 3.7, and New Mexico, 8.5. Then in New York, it was relatively bluer by 7, and North Carolina, 7.6. But in North Dakota, they were redder at 28.2. Ohio was barely redder at just 0.9%. Oklahoma back up there at 15.8. Oregon had the tiniest of blue percentages at just 0.1%. Pennsylvania, double digits bluer at 16.8. Rhode Island, that state is even more at 20.2. South Carolina also bluer at 8.1. But in South Dakota, that was way redder at 19.1. Tennessee bluer at 9.4. Texas redder at 4.2. Utah about 10 times that, and relatively the highest percentage in the entire country at 42.5. Vermont was a little bit bluer at 3.7. Virginia a little redder at 3.0. Washington just under that at 2.7. West Virginia bluer at 14.2. Wisconsin same direction at 5%. And Wyoming comes in relatively redder at 24.9. Then it's Washington, D.C., way bluer at 71.2. So that's the entire map. And at the top, if you want to see who came out ahead, if you total up the electoral votes, states that were relatively redder came in at 241. States that were relatively bluer came in at 297. So even though Reagan won 44 states, enough of them were by low to mid-single digit margins that enough of them were still relatively bluer. I don't think Reagan cares, though. He'll take that landslide. So what are the takeaways from this map? Well, back then it was kind of a different era. Much of the South was much bluer with the exception of Florida. And this time the West Coast is a little bit mixed. Oregon's support for Reagan was just a little bit behind its neighbors, Washington and California. The Rust Belt states were all relatively bluer, but back then Virginia was redder and West Virginia was way bluer. In the Northeast, you've got a lot of blue states except for New Hampshire and New Jersey. Connecticut was very close to the rest of the country, and in Rhode Island, that was relatively the second bluest state after Carter's home state of Georgia. So a lot of interesting data on this map. On a glance, it kind of looks like most of the western part of the country is a lot redder, while much of the blue is concentrated toward the east. But when you go back this many years, you're bound to see some unusual states doing unusual things. And there's plenty of that you could point out on this map. But ultimately, Carter was defeated as an incumbent. And if you thought this was a big landslide for Reagan, his 84 landslide was even bigger. So that's kind of it for this one. This is the map of how each state voted relative to the national popular vote in the 1980 election. So let me know in the comments. Do you see any pattern with these states? What about third-party candidate John Anderson? How much of a factor was he in any of these margins? And how impressive was this win for Reagan? Let me know what stands out to you the most down below on your way out. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Join if you'd like to support the channel. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.